Portions of KDKR programming do not necessarily reflect the views of this station, its management, or staff.
Prudent Money with Bob Brooks is sponsored by the Prudent Money Foundation on 91.3.
Well, 7 secrets to free up cash. Today we're going to take a look. Stay tuned for Prudent Money. This is Bob Brooks, and you are listening to the Prudent Money Radio Show. Thank you so much for joining me today. You know I do appreciate it. Well, what do you know about cash flow? Today, Chris Miles, the cash flow expert and founder of Money Ripples, is here to give us some useful advice. Hey, Chris, welcome to Prudent Money.
Hey, Bob. Such a pleasure to be here.
You know, let's start with your story that had led you out of a tough situation into a position today to teach and coach people about money.
You bet. You know, I actually started as a financial advisor back in the day. You know, the traditional guy, kind of like the salesman in a suit type of person that would just try to sell you a bunch of mutual funds and tell you to pay off all your, the kind of the vanilla advice that you talk about not having on the show, right? And so I had actually done that for several years. Then I sat down with my dad, and as I sat down with him, and my dad was like the penny pinching saver, the set it and forget it, we can't afford this, we think I am made of money, I'm just going to save everything I can, pay off all my debt, and hope it works out. And so I call it the slave and save method, and so he did that for decades. And he said, Chris, are you going to advise me at some point? I had been an advisor for 4 years at this point, and so I sat down with him and looked at all of his numbers. I said, Dad, you're 61 years old. If you want to retire today, well, you better hope you die in about 5 or 6 years, because that's when you're going to run out of money. And he said, well, that's not what I wanted to hear from you. You're supposed to tell me how to retire. And I said, I don't know. You did everything right. He's a financial advisor. You've been packing away money in your 401k, getting a match. You've paid off all your debt. It's just not enough. And eventually I walked away pretty discouraged. I told him, you're probably just going to have to keep working. Possibly into your 70s, depending on how the stock market does. And he did. He actually did that. And anyways, I started looking for more answers. And of course, this is the end of 2005, going into 2006. I realized I wanted to see where there's actually evidence that worked. And I found guys that are doing real estate investing. I started doing that instead of just, putting my money away and setting it aside. And next thing you know, later that next year, I was able to be financially free. I had enough passive income coming in from my investments that I was able to quit. I was 28 years old, and I was like, wow, I can retire. But that's not the end of the story, because, as you well know, a few years later, I'm of course coming out of retirement to teach people how I did what I did. The recession starts to hit. And at that point, I cut off all my passive streams of income. I went all in on my business, and this business was catering towards real estate investors who were now going broke during the recession. And so between starting a new business, I had a lot of costs there, my own life and everything else. The next thing I know, I went from millionaire to upside down millionaire, where I was over $1 million in debt. Watching all my, basically my investments erode, and watching my business, just tanking at that point. And I was in a pretty bad situation. I was in the hole about $15,000, $16,000 a month when all was said and done. And that's kind of when you mentioned about the 7 secrets to free up cash. That's kind of when I figured it out, because I stopped teaching people how to get out of the rat race, because then I'd be a liar and a deceiver. I didn't want to be somebody who didn't practice what I preached, and I was back in the rat race. So I started telling people how to do what I did, which was how do I get creative and find money and avoid bankruptcy. And I was able to free up, not just cash flow for myself, but I was actually able to help a lot of our clients really now over the last, it's been over 15 years. I've been freed up over $300 million in the last 15 years now.
Well, Chris, at what point did you get to where you go, but you know what, I think I'm going to be okay. I think I'm going to make it. That's a good question, because, for a few years I had little glimmers of hope, and I was doing a lot of praying, a lot of fasting, doing a lot, just like saying, okay, God, I know there's a reason for this. Why is this happening? And it came down to the point where I just had to have the faith that everything happens for a reason, that there are no accidents. And I figured, okay, there's got to be a way through this. I just don't know how. And, so I had to have that faith first before there was ever any evidence. right? Which
Right.
kind of the definition of faith, isn't it? You know, and that's kind of what was happening. And so it wasn't until about 2009, right about there, that I just submitted fully. I said, I don't care how long this takes. I'm going to keep following your will, and wherever that leads me, it leads me. And it was just like a month or so later after that, things started to turn around. The business started to turn around. We got, just the right people happened to show up at the right times. It was very divinely led. And of course, as income started to come in, keeping me out of my negative hole, my negative cash flow hole, I was able to help dig out of some of the debt that I had. And, I refused to go bankrupt, even though I know it would have been easier if I did. I just was too dang stubborn. So
Sure.
I didn't do it. But that's when I really started to see the hope, was as the business started to turn around, I started to at least be in a place where I was cash flow positive each month. I could start to pay off those loans and really just, get to a point where I could start building up savings again and start to invest again. And that's when I really started to have more hope.
Well, I think that we both agree that traditional financial advice is flawed. I call it pop culture finance. And I'm just amazed at some of the articles and unfortunately the go-to money magazines of the world, where people have to go to get information because there's not any good resources like you've got, and telling, hey, here's another way of doing it. Here's another way to consider it. Here's a way to think differently and to consider the other side of the story, and which is what we talk about all the time on the program.
Absolutely. It's not that I don't think financial advisors are doing bad. I believe they're all trying to help people, just like I was, right? It's just, unfortunately, like you said, you hear all the financial talking heads. I mean, they're all paid by the same people that a lot of financial advisors are also paid by, which are the financial institutions, right? I mean, all of our financial education is coming from the same institutions, telling us to set it and forget it, put it in their funds, right? Put it in their places where they make money off of you with no risk, right? They tell you that take high risk, create high returns, yet they'll take their guaranteed fees whether you make money or not. So you're taking all the risk, while they take none of it, and they get paid. And to me, that's where I think the real crux of it comes down to, is most of the education you're seeing, the vanilla stuff that you can put out by, publishers, that's and whatnot, is the same old advice of, just keep your expenses under control, pay off your debt, save everything in mutual funds, and eventually someday you might have something. And it's just the completely opposite. It's just not working that way.
We'll talk a little bit about the foundational principles of your cash flow equals freedom philosophy.
Yeah, what I find, and I'm sure you've heard the same thing too over the years, is that when it comes down to it, people, what they really want is they want to have enough money coming in to be able to pay their bills, right? And ideally, be able to have that money coming in to pay their bills, that they don't have to keep working and slaving away until they're in their 70s, like my dad did. And I think that's ultimately what it is. Like, it really comes down to, how do I have income coming in? And everybody talks about future planning, but so few people ever talk about present planning. Like, what do I do right now to improve my cash flow position, where I have more than enough money coming in to pay for my expenses, right? How do I have enough money coming in that even if I stop working, that I'm still okay, my family's still taken care of, and maybe I even have enough to not just take care of my family, which I think is like a bare minimum, kind of a slightly self-centered view, even though some people would arguably say, well, no, I'm taking care of my family. That's not selfish. But the truth is that I believe that all the human families are family. And if you're really going to be here to increase your stewardship, right, to take the blessings and multiply upon it, what you need to really do is become a wise steward of your money and amplify it in a way that allows you to become a better servant, to be a better person that can actually go out there and live a fuller purpose, rather than just taking care of your family, just barely making it just to pay the bills, and you hope and pray for Social Security to help bridge the gap, because you find out too late, unfortunately, that just saving the traditional way, even if it's in 401k, even if it's in traditional mutual funds, it may just not be enough, especially with the amount, with inflation and everything else happening. So that's where I really take the focus of, how do we actually improve that cash flow right now, so that you not just have a good future, but you have a good present that leads to a much better future as well.
This is Bob Brooks, and you are listening to the Prudent Money Radio Show. Thank you so much for joining me today. I do appreciate it. Talking to Chris Miles, and if you want more information about Chris, moneyripples.com. He also has a YouTube channel, Money Ripples with Chris Miles. And you can go check that out for more information. You know, I was thinking about cash flow, and I was thinking about, as I was prepping for our talk today, and I was thinking about the biggest mistake I know that I made, and it took me forever to get out of the hole, was that I didn't know how to live within my means. And cash flow comes in, spend it now. I'll figure it out later, you know. And then so many people fall victim to that.
Absolutely. It's true. I believe there's really three money mindsets. Obviously, there's a spender mindset, right, which is easy come, easy go, and you'll always live in scarcity in that spender mindset. Saver mindset, which is also in scarcity. This believes you can never save enough, you can never pay off debt fast enough. It's just never enough. And that's what my dad had fell prey to, right? He was very much of that Depression-era mentality. He just felt like he had to keep saving and saving and saving, but never about having a steward mindset, where a steward mindset takes the best of the spender and the saver and puts into one person. Because the truth is, money is meant to be used, right? I mean, we are stewards of money. It's not just meant to be put on the shelf to collect dust, you know, even if it's in a bank or whatever it might be. That's not about what it's about. It's really like the parable of the talents in the Bible, right? Where those three different servants were given a sum of money. Ironically, isn't it funny that there's certain radio personalities out there that tell you, hey, debt is evil, yet Jesus even taught about how to use debt wisely with three different servants. And the one that actually got in trouble was the one that said, I'm just going to bury it. I'm going to pay my debt back. I'm fine. And you think it's so unjust that he got cast out and it was given to the guy that had 5 sums of money or 5 talents and made 10. The money was given to him. Why? Because he was willing to be a steward of those resources. He was willing to multiply upon those resources. And I think that's the one thing that's just not really taught. Most of all the vanilla financial advice, all the stuff that we hear in media is a saver perspective, but unfortunately, people never truly become financially nor emotionally free because they believe it's just never enough. They have to keep saving, and it just never stops. You know, even if they become debt-free, I get people all the time that reach out and say, Chris, you know, like I'm now worth $3 million, I'm debt-free, yet I don't have a single dollar coming in without me working my job. Like I'm just hoping this is enough. And so you got to switch into that steward mentality, which is money is meant to be used, but wisely. Don't blow it like a spender will do, but use it wisely in a way that does create increase and ideally even blesses lives in the process.
Now you have a strategy that you write about called getting money to pay you twice. Talk a little bit about that.
Yeah, there's a strategy that you'll hear some people mention, especially on YouTube. You'll hear a lot of hype about like this infinite banking concept. It's created by a guy named Nelson Nash.
Yes.
Now, I bought into that hook, line, and sinker about almost 20 years ago. Actually, when I left being a financial advisor, I'd never heard of it. But these guys that were all, you know, a lot of these real estate investors were saying it was the best thing since sliced bread. And they were doing it. So I did it too. Even though I had an insurance license, I still trusted this guy to do it. And I remember looking at these, and just so you know, if you haven't heard of infinite banking, it's basically using life insurance, but not the death benefit part. This is whole life insurance, where it has a death benefit and it has this tax-free savings account or cash value that's a part of it. Now, when I looked at it, I said, dang, this is expensive. You know, I paid into this for a couple of years, and it all is just going to pay for insurance costs because it's unlike term insurance, it gets more expensive over time. Whole life starts out expensive up front and then gets cheaper over time. And I asked the guy, I said, hey, is there a way we can pull different levers to make this cheaper? And he said no. 2 years later, of course, I bought that in 2006. 2 years later, the recession's in full force. I'm going broke. I can't afford to pay those premiums. I was paying $1,000 a month into this thing. And I called the insurance company. I said, is there anything I could do? They said, no, if you don't pay the premium, you'll lose the insurance. I paid $25,000 into these infinite banking policies that these guys all raved about. I had nothing to show for it. I lost it. It was like the most expensive waste of money. It was worse than term insurance, you know, over time. And so I just thought, okay, it's the way the recession is. Oh, well. Well, several months later, I'm doing my own research, find out that guy, the insurance agent that sold it to me, could have pulled levers to make it cheaper. So I confronted him. I showed him my own numbers because I still had that insurance license. I just didn't, know how to do it before. I showed my own numbers and said, hey, look, from day one, I can have cash in here and not have all this expense going out. And finally, after a 2-hour debate, he just said, Chris, I did it that way because I couldn't afford to cut my commissions. I said, there's the truth. So anyways, the last, now 15 plus years, I've finally found a way to do it in a way that I like it, because the truth is, if I just buy a term and invest the difference, that ends up being a waste of money, because my estate attorney, as you actually build wealth and are successful, the estate attorney is going to tell you when you're in your 60s and 70s, now you should buy life insurance to pay off the taxes or the other bills, so you don't have to liquidate your assets. Well, I don't want to do that. I'd rather do it when I'm younger. So yes, I have an insurance need, but now when I pay for it, now it pays for itself so much more quickly that it actually makes term insurance look like a ripoff. And so that's what I start doing now. And I actually teach people how to use it as a tax-free savings account versus just a big death benefit that everybody tries to sell it as. I use it as this tax-free, high-yield savings account that right now is paying me 6+% a year. I pay no taxes on it. And, that money is accessible. I can use it any time, unlike the traditional stuff where it's locked up and you can't access it. So, unfortunately, insurance agents just don't teach that kind of thing, but it is possible to do that I didn't even think was possible before.
Now, what are your go-to techniques for quickly increasing cash flow in people's lives, and some of the things that you teach?
Yeah, I'm going to just breeze over tracking money. I mean, obviously you should be doing that, and I don't just mean tracking spending. I mean tracking how much money is coming in and what's going out. A wise steward looks at income and expenses. Remember, spenders only look at their income, ignore their expenses. Savers hyper-focus on expenses but ignore making more money. Steward does both. And so make sure you're tracking your money, whether you're using Rocket Money or Monarch, whatever works best. Track your money at least on a weekly basis. Going beyond that, though, now, what do you do with other things? One is, do you have assets sitting around that aren't creating cash flow for you? Lately, I have been seeing so many people having money locked up in stock markets, crypto, things like that, where the stock market's already overvalued at this point. Like even Buffett's been liquidating cash right now for the last 2 years. Well, and crypto too. Crypto's been high, and it's such a big gamble. But people are holding on to it thinking that they're going to get rich off of it. Yet, they might still carry credit card debt, right? Or they might just be in a situation where they're barely making it month to month. I'll tell you, I had a client that had $3.5 million net worth, yet they were paycheck to paycheck. Not because they were spending too much, but because they were saving so much and locking away into prison. And that's another one of those little secrets too, is that sometimes the 401k is not a good thing. Sometimes you can go a little overboard on the 401k where you're illiquid, and he didn't have hardly any cash because he was just trying to grow his money so much. He was locking the money away. He was putting in his company's 401k, but if he ever needed, he couldn't get out. He had a little bit of a emergency fund. Of course, he had a few $100,000 in there, but not much. Most of it was all locked up in crypto. It was in different types of IRAs and 401ks and things like that. And so I teach people to get money out of prison. And I said, listen, if you want to get to a point where you don't feel like you're slaving away, and by the way, his wife was super mad at him because she's like, I still have to keep working because he does this. So I said, why don't we free up some cash? Found out because they were saving so much money, they even started running up credit cards. So I said, first and foremost, stop funding your 401k while you're running up debt. That's dumb. Let's actually instead redirect that money. I said, in fact, you've got money in crypto right now. What if you liquidate some of that crypto and use that to pay off some of these credit cards? I'm like, oh, by the way, he actually had bought life insurance, whole life insurance. He had about $250,000 saved up in that he was just locking money away. I said, you can access that cash in your life insurance policy, pay off those credit card debts, and you'll free up $2,815 a month just doing that alone. I said, if you take that money plus take money like some of the crypto and some of the money you have in like high risk stocks, cash that out, we can go buy real estate and do some things with that, making easily 10%, 12% a year, like contractually making that much money. We can bridge the gap, and we can actually increase your cash flow by over $4,500 a month with just a few $100,000. Yeah. And that was the thing. Net worth is worthless unless it turns into cash flow.
Chris, you were talking about mindset, which I'm a big believer in. Talk a little bit about how you get clients to shift from that scarcity mindset to an abundance mindset.
It's tough because we are raised in it and we were taught in it, and every bit of financial advice out there is pretty much, now I'm not saying everybody, but the mainstream media that you see, the pop culture, as you mentioned, right, the pop financial advice is scarcity based. It's always like, you just got to set and forget it, slave and save, right? But in an abundance mentality, you start to realize that One, and this is even dealing with when it comes to money, one, there's always enough resource, there's always enough money, there's always enough opportunity. If you have that kind of mindset, you might feel less inclined to want to spend it all, right? Because often it's a scarcity mindset that gets us to spend. Hey, I got to do it today. I've heard this all the time. If I just save my money and if I don't spend it now, I guarantee it's going to get taken up by a car breaking down, a washer or dryer breaking down. Something will happen. We'll have to spend this money for something responsible. So I might as well use it for something that's not responsible that I enjoy, right? Legitimate emotions, legitimate feelings, but definitely driven by scarcity, versus realizing that God is the abundance of all things. Like, He's the creator of all things in the universe. He does not worry about having enough. And He is the author and creator of all prosperity. You can tap into that same as well, right? Here's another example. With income, people think I can't make enough money. Well, the truth is, if you keep saying that, that will always be true. You'll create a self-fulfilling prophecy. It's also true that if you always focus on how do I make more money, you'll never make more money. Focus on principles first. The principle for making more money, this is what cracked the code for me to start making better income, even after I stopped being a financial advisor, was understanding that it's not about how much money I earn. It's not even about just trying to make more money, right? It's not trying to work harder or more hours. It's about how do I go about creating more value for more people. Dollars follow value. How do I solve problems for people? How do I actually add value? How do I even just, essentially serve people in such a way that money is a natural byproduct? I had a client that he worked for a bank. He said, hey, there's a job up for grabs, but there's going to be over 100 candidates. I want to get it, and it will give me a $4,000 a month raise. I said, well, do you know what it will take to get it? He said, I don't. I said, ask the employer. Ask them, what would it take for me to earn this promotion, or earn this raise? He went to him and asked them that question. They said, if you do X, Y, Z, you have a better shot. So I said, hey, even if you take an extra hour a day just for the next 3 weeks, because that's when you're up for grabs, work hard and do what they asked. And so he did. 3 weeks later, they gave him one of the two positions available. Out of over 100 candidates, he got one of the two positions. They called him in the office and said, do you know why you got it? It wasn't because you're the best-selling guy, because the best salesman, we did give him the other position. But we gave it to you because you were the only person that asked us what you could do to actually earn it. And we're not used to that. And so for that reason, and because you at least performed decently, we actually gave you the other position. Gave him a $4,000 a month increase on his pay. That's something, if you were always, instead of looking at people like you're working for the man in that scarcity, right, and they're trying to take from you, it's a zero-sum game. Somebody has to win and somebody has to lose. Realize it is a win-win. It's not a zero-sum game. It is a win-win game. You'll find out it's actually not hard. So how do I help create a win-win for you so that we can win together? You come with that kind of perspective, you'll make more money and therefore have more money to use to be able to create more abundance in your life as well.
Well, if you want more information about Chris, www.moneyripples.com, and you can also go check out his YouTube channel, Money Ripples with Chris Miles. Hey, Chris, great to have you on the program today. Enjoy talking to you. Good luck.
Same here, Bob. Thanks.
This is Bob Brooks, and you are listening to the Prudent Money Radio Show. Thank you so much for joining me today. You know I do appreciate it. I tell you what, it's good to get good financial advice, and hopefully that's one of the reasons why you listen to Prudent Money. But to bring different ideas to the table and understanding the way things work and getting like I said, getting a good education on it. I was just thinking back just how important cash flow is, how important living within your means is, and I remember getting out of college and just spending money like it was like I didn't have, I was going to run out, and of course, it led to a month-to-month type of situation. And I just want to stress something. I've been thinking about this a lot lately. Is if there's one thing that you can really teach your kids and get them on a right track, especially if they're in a situation where they're graduating from college, graduating from high school. In fact, it was my wife that reminded me of this, that I need to do a little bit more time talking to my boys about some of these things. And she was specifically talking about saving money, but is the importance of living within your means. I mean, there's bottom line, there's X amount of dollars that comes in each month, and there is X amount of dollars that goes out each month, and you got to make that work and got to make that come together. But just a couple things to think about. Hey, this is Bob Brooks, and you are listening to the Prudent Money Radio Show. If you got a question for me, please go to the website at prudentmoney.com and send it in, because we are all out of time. Till we do meet again next time, keep the faith and have a great rest of the day.
That's all the time we have for today. Questions or comments for Bob, or to find out more great information like what you've just heard, visit www.prudentmoney.com. Be sure to join Bob Brooks again for the next edition of Prudent Money.